Go Create podcast. This is Tim Winders, your host. I'm a coach for business owners, executives, and leaders. My wife and I, we consider ourselves nomads, and we currently travel, live, and work in our 39-foot RV. I am recording my portion of this podcast from the passenger seat of my mobile office. I do want to make sure that everyone listens to the end of the podcast. We will include ways that you can continue the conversation that we start today by connecting with us directly. And we encourage that. We really, really want you to do that. So listen, today we have Rashmi Airan as our guest, and Rashmi is a corporate and motivational speaker. She is, and this is quotes from her, a recovering lawyer and investment banker, a woman leader and an entrepreneur in her community. Rashmi is now an internationally recognized keynote motivational speaker and a TEDx presenter. I just watched her TEDx talk yesterday. It is phenomenal. And she also works with clients that include the FBI, Sotheby's, MGM Resorts, and Columbia Law School. During the housing boom, this is a fascinating story, and we're going to be discussing this some. During the housing boom back in '08, up to '08, she was recruited to work with a local real estate developer who later engaged in questionable business practices. Her involvement resulted in a 6-month prison sentence in federal prison for bank fraud, alongside a multi-billion-dollar judgment against future earnings. It required community service and 3 years supervised release. And I just want to say, wow, that's what actually attracted me. She's brilliant in so many ways, but I was doing some research on people that spent time in federal prison. So anyway, Rashmi, welcome to the Seek, Go, Create podcast.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. First question I always like to ask is just a real simple, I give the bio, and obviously it's got some things that we're really going to dive into later, but what do you do now? What's your elevator pitch? We bump into each other on the elevator and I say, hey, what do you do?
I would say that I share a really vulnerable story with people, and I kind of get courageous to share something that I think most people wouldn't share about. And I'm all about transparency and authenticity. And I've had the honor of now being able to sort of extrapolate the lessons that I learned and have the opportunity to work with like C-suite, executive leadership teams, large corporations, associations. So I typically am either a keynote speaker and or I lead workshops for all levels and types of organizations as well as sizes. That's what I do.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So you've used what could have been some pretty tough experiences to really take a message. And to me, listen, it gets my attention, and I've always told people that a lot of the things I've been through, I would not wish it on anyone else, but I'm thankful that I went through it. I'm almost hesitating in saying that. Would that qualify for where you're at, or is that a little bit too strong?
No, it's actually right on point. I agree. It's not like I want or wish for anyone to have to go through prison, right? Or to lose their bar license, which happened to me, and lose all my money, right? So I've gone through a lot of really difficult circumstances. I've definitely been brought down to my knees. But I will say that I have changed in a way that I never expected, and I'm happier than I thought I could be. And I've really kind of found the ability to be real. So I actually tell people, you know what, I had to lose my freedom to have complete freedom, which means I just live in complete transparency, and I'm, you get what you get with me.
Yeah. All right. So there's a couple of, I don't even know if I could call them elephants in the room, especially since we're, on a video call and recording, but there are two things that just jumped out at me as you were speaking.
Okay.
One is, I don't think we can go into a lot of the ethics training and talk about things like slippery slope, the ethical vigilance, which is a great term that you use in your TED talk that I meditated and really said, ethical vigilance, that is fascinating. But you just brought up something that at the time we're recording this, we'll go ahead and let people know we're in the month of May 2020. And I know people may be listening to this much later, and we are hopeful that the situations that people are in with the economy and health and so many things that are changing in the world that we're in are going to be adjusted. However, you just said that you lost your money, you were disbarred, you lost your identity, your role, everything that you had. I think people are scratching their heads, having a difficult time understanding how you can say that as lightly as you just did. Give a little bit more and talk to the person that's going, I can't fathom that.
Well, it wasn't easy. It took me a while to get to this place of peace, right? At the beginning, I would say I was incredibly angry and full of negative energy and bitter for a lot of reasons. Why weren't other people indicted? In my case, there's a lot of reasons why I had this sort of sense of unfairness. And I was really fortunate. I had a ton of support around me, and I think a lot of that came from my taking ownership, and we can get into that later. But I really will say that I had love and family support. And one specific uncle said to me when we kind of I'm from India, and so we sat my Indian community around with my parents and told them right after I got indicted. And a very wise uncle was sitting next to me on the couch. There were about 50 people there. And he looked at me and he said, in Hindi, he said, Beti, which means daughter. He said, Beti, until you realize that this is happening, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you. You won't find peace until that point. And this was right after I got indicted, so I wasn't there yet. And I wasn't ready to really embrace what that meant. And I would say 4 to 5 months after that, once I decided to plea, I found this place of complete peace. And then that meant that whatever was happening in my life, I was going to take it. And I was going, I believe in life, we have in every moment 3 options. You can accept what you're going through, you can enjoy what you're going through, or you can be enthusiastic what you're going through. But being negative and bitter is not an option. And I think as a mother, I had a responsibility to also stand up for my children and to show them what life is like and how you live through really difficult circumstances. I mean, we're living in a stage right now where I know so many people are facing, loss of income, unemployment, health challenges or family health challenges. And it's hard. And sometimes you kind of have to come to a place of peace and try to see the good. And that was what I tried to do in that moment. I would say part of that is I also have faith in myself and my abilities. So yes, I lost my bar license. Yes, obviously I lost a lot of income and my ability to make income in the way that I was used to making it. And I believe in myself and have enough faith in my ability to bounce back. So, whether you want to call it grit or resilience, I call it I'm indomitable. That's sort of how I describe myself. Like, I cannot be defeated. This is what I believe about myself. And so that innate strength has allowed me to sort of overcome all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a work in progress.
Yeah. I was good because that's where I was about to go, because hindsight really helps all of us. And I've shared very openly on the podcast about our journey through the same situations that you had.
Right.
Didn't include prison, but bankruptcy, foreclosure, losing your home, all of those things are
they're hard.
relative, I guess. Yeah, difficult. And I've actually attempted to reflect back on it and ask myself, what were my takeaways along the way? What were my plateaus? What were my, progressions? And so I'll kind of ask you a similar question. You mentioned your wise uncle. Everyone needs a wise uncle. You mentioned your wise uncle giving you advice that at the time he gave it to you, you probably didn't receive it. You made note of it, but you didn't receive it. So, and maybe it might be helpful for the audience here for us to just discuss a few facts along the way. Let's go back and maybe do a quick timeline, but I don't want it to be just a timeline. I would love for you, especially now years later, to kind of say, at this point, I was angry. At this point, I was in denial, So
Okay.
maybe just a real quick, because what I want to get to is I want to get to where you talk about the peace, the self-forgiveness. I want to get to where you reposition yourself to use all of this for good. But right now, I want to give a little bit of background. Is that okay?
Sure.
Sure. All right. So go.
Okay. So I graduated from law school. Well, so let's go back. I grew up in Miami. My parents, like I said, are from India, so I am the oldest of three daughters, which comes along with that comes a lot of pressure, self-imposed and culturally, I think, sort of just set within our societal requirements, as well as being an Indian. I think there's even extra immigrant pressure and just hardworking pressure. My parents are very super educated and lots of graduate degrees. uh, I went to UNC Chapel Hill, graduated with highest honors. I moved to New York and I worked on Wall Street for a few years, and then I went to law school at Columbia, and I ultimately graduated from Columbia a Kent Scholar, which is essentially like the highest sort of honor I guess you could get at Columbia. From there I went to California and practiced for about a year and then moved back to Miami. And I had a couple of jobs. I worked for a litigation boutique, a small little law firm. I worked for the government. I was a county attorney for a few years. And then in 2004, I left and started my own practice. And it was around the time I had sort of recently gotten married. I knew I wanted to have children. And so I left. I started my own basically real estate title transactional practice. And I was pounding the pavement. Now, I will tell you that at that time, since you want the details of moments, my husband at the time was a firefighter. So I was the major breadwinner, right? And with that came a lot of pressure. Pretty quickly, we had two children. And in 2007, so if you take yourselves back to sort of the heyday of real estate, right? This is before the market crashed, before the sort of real estate recession that happened. I had this opportunity to meet a real estate developer. And of course, hindsight's 2020, but then I thought, wow, if I can get a developer to be a client, I'm a solo practitioner. I had 5 people that worked for me. I thought, and I was really out there hustling. I was like spending a lot of time going to networking meetings and doing business development and bringing in clients. And I was doing great, right? I wasn't having any problems. But when I had an opportunity to meet a real estate developer, I thought, well, if I can get one big client with volume business, that would mean more time, more financial stability, which ultimately to me as a mom meant more time with my kids. Yeah. So that's how I saw it. I walked in to a small office on Miami Beach, North Miami Beach. And I was introduced to the developer's 2 right-hand guys, right? And I'm telling you these details because they're relevant. The developer himself sat in another room. Okay, he never came into that meeting. I was introduced to him later, but he didn't come into that actual meeting. The 2 right-hand guys, and by the way, I'm going to give you a lot of details, and I'm saying these things not to offend others, but it sort of, I would say, it was relevant to my thought process and what was going on and why I trusted as easily as I did, or why I shouldn't have, So when I walked in, these 2 individuals were, and I won't disclose what religion they were of, but they were wearing externally items that reflected to me exactly what religion they were, which is essentially an extreme form of a specific religion. And I was born Hindu, and I've always been raised with this idea that innately everyone has good in them. Okay, and then to take it a step further, I've also been taught to believe that those who are of faith are good people. Okay, are going to follow the rules, are going to do what's right, and know right from wrong, and are going to do the right, not the wrong, and be ethical, to put it lightly. So immediately, my guards went down. I had zero professional skepticism, and instead they began to describe these transactions that they were already doing with a larger law firm, and they essentially said, "Well, we've been working with this big law firm. We'd like to leave and start working with you," which should have set off a lot of alarms. But at the time I didn't think of it that way, right? I didn't think well, wait a second, why would they be leaving a big law firm to come to me? The big law firm has more resources, more capacity, more experience, right? All of the things that a developer presumably would want. But instead of thinking that way, I was thinking, oh, there must be something special about me, or, oh yeah, and I was flattered. And I wanted this client. I was so focused on getting the client and proving myself, and I'm going to achieve that client, so I didn't do my due diligence, and I made a lot of assumptions. So I assumed, I knew at this point in time that most of the big developers, not just in South Florida, but all over the country, were utilizing creative methods to close transactions, right? So there were all sorts of different scenarios that were being used. This was one of them. And as he began to describe the scenario that he had been doing, I was like, well, okay, it's kind of in the gray. It's creative, but okay, everybody else is doing it. Must be fine. And I assumed that the big law firms representing the big developers had already done their due diligence, right? Why do I need to do it? Which, of course, I'm a lawyer. There's absolutely zero.
Let me ask one question to clarify here, though. At your practice at that time, were you, because I know you were doing well in other areas, was it fledgling and just getting started? Did you have I call it a book of business. I'm not sure if that's correct in the law. Did you have a lot? Were they about to maybe double or up your business by 25%? I guess what I'm trying to get inside of is, there's very vulnerable places that all of us can be in. Some are financial, some are, like you mentioned, spiritual. You thought these guys had a code of ethics because I don't know if they had the sign of the fish on their shirts or if they, had certain head coverings or whatever. It doesn't matter. But where was, without maybe a lot of detail, where was the financial piece of your practice when these guys walked in the door?
I would not describe my practice as fledgling. I think that I was doing fine, but there's always this attraction to do better and achieve more and make more, right? If money is this object that's out there that you want to try to get.
And during that time, there was a lot of money being made, and there was a statement that you made that I think is going to come into play later when we talk about ethical vigilance and the slippery slope. And that is, everybody's doing it.
So, I think, to put it in financial terms, this client basically doubled my income for those 2 years. So if that gives you sort of any relevance. I mean, and the way I saw it was, that meant I could, lay off having to pound the pavement as much as I was and just focus on this one client, and spend more time at home. So, who could have known it would cost me everything, right?
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So I wanted to clarify that. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I've always had this theory in business that the number one is one of the most dangerous numbers. It's probably dangerous in a lot of other areas too, but one client or one employee or one person running things. And it's not entirely the case, but I don't think it dispels that theory. It says that you probably were going to put a lot of time, energy, and effort, and it was going to be very financially rewarding. So thank you for sharing that. All right, let's keep moving along.
So I start working with this developer, and it was almost like a steamroller. Like a steamroller comes in and it plows through. And I like I said, I never took the time, nor did I make the time to do my due diligence. And essentially, within 2 weeks, I had my first request, and it just never stopped, right? The steamroller just came through, and it was like full force ahead. Now, there were moments along the way, and maybe later on you can ask me about those after the chronology, where I could have and should have thought to listen a little bit harder to my inner voice and really sort of stop and pause. But I got really good at ignoring that inner voice because I was just plowing through, right? So I did about 100 closings for this developer, and there were 100 in Tampa and about 100 in Palm Beach. And then it was March of 2009. So like 16 months after I had met the developer. And I basically decided, you know what, I'm going to stop doing transactional work altogether. The units in both of these properties have now fully sold. So I stopped working with the developer, and I merged my practice with my father's. My father is also an attorney. He'd been practicing for many years. And I think for many years I kept saying, no, I'm not going to join you for whatever reason. There's lots of reasons. I had to deconstruct that. But, and once I did merge my practice, then we were focused on the litigation side. So now I'm growing our litigation practice because the market had dropped by this point. Foreclosures were hot, and we began to pursue the plaintiff side of foreclosures. So I was now traveling the country, growing our client base, going to conferences, and trying to get Fannie and Freddie and lots of other types of clients, big banks as clients. So then 2 years go by, and it's May 2011, and the FBI knocks on my door. And, nobody tells you in law school or in life, for that matter, unless maybe you've heard my story or somebody else in your family or friend circle has been touched by this, unfortunately. But nobody, like, human nature takes over. If the FBI is at your door, the first thing you feel is fear. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be an open book because I truly believed I hadn't done anything wrong. So I thought, I'm going to be an open book and I'm going to meet with him. So I
And
let
you're
him
an
in.
attorney, and
And
what
I'm an
everybody
attorney.
says is what should you do?
I know I should know better, right? I mean, sometimes I speak to large audiences and people will ask me, how did you not know? I just didn't know. I mean, I didn't know that I could take the guy's card and say, can I call you back with an attorney, right? I didn't know that I had that right, frankly. It's not like I took a lot of criminal law courses in law school, right? I took like the one obligatory one and that's it. So I let these two agents into my office, and I used to have like a circular table in my office next to my desk. And we sat there and they grilled me for 4 hours. Like, they were showing me documents and pictures and emails and like everything you can imagine, they were showing me. And I'm answering these questions definitively as if I remembered what had happened for 3-4 years earlier, in specificity. Like, have you ever seen this email?
Did a light go off in your head? Uh-oh, at any point?
No, because I was like in denial. I was in like fast mode, fear, intimidation, and I obviously wasn't allowing myself to go there, right? I realized that. So they leave after 4 hours, and then nothing happens for 2 years. So 2 years now go by. Oh, they left me with a grand jury subpoena for some files, so I submitted the files. Now 2 years go by, and one of my mentors, who's the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District, who's like a dad to me, basically, had represented me on like some other side matter with the Florida bar, and or so I forget, it was some case. So I don't know. Somehow they got wind of that. They must have like looked it up, and they send him a grand jury subpoena for me. So he calls me. It's June 2013. So 6 years after I met this developer, right? 4 years after I stopped working with him. And he calls me up and he says, I have a grand jury subpoena for you. We need to talk. So for about 3 months, they wanted all my files. I'm like, okay, I'm the records custodian. They just want my files, but they're not after me. They're after the developer and everybody else, the buyers, because I'm still operating under this pretense, like I haven't done anything wrong. So 3 months later, he calls me into his office and he's like, you're a target, Rashmi. Which honestly, I didn't even know what that meant, right? I was like, I don't know what that means. And when he explained it to me, I will tell you that I started shaking uncontrollably. I mean, I'm on the other side of it now, right? I'm at peace. I get to talk about it and share it and help people through my story. But then I would literally shake at the mere mention of the prosecutor's name, my attorney's name. I would get an email. It was like, this was my whole life. This was everything I had worked so hard for. And the only thought in my mind that kept going through was, I'm disgracing my parents. I'm disgracing my children. I'm disgracing my community. I happened to sit on a lot of boards in Miami and be involved in our community. And I felt like my life was ending. That's what it felt like.
So was that the moment that it kind of, there was denial, and then there's that moving into denial to, I hate to say, uh-oh, it doesn't seem to even capture it well, but that you knew something was up and this could be bad. Is that the moment? Because up to that point, it seems as if you were not really recognizing the gravity of the situation.
Well, I'll say that I, at that moment, recognized the gravity, but I had not yet owned it. I was still in massive denial. And I was in denial for a very long time, right? So the prosecutor kept calling, his name's Joe. Joe and I are friends now. Now we speak together, and it's awesome. I just spoke to him yesterday on the phone, but it was a journey to get there. A lot of self-growth, I think, for both of us, but obviously for me more. But he kept calling my attorney and saying, look, Rashmi still has time. please, I just want to talk to her. And what happened was internally, I was like, but I don't know anything. What am I going to say? On principle, what am I going to say? I was so stuck. I was stuck and scared out of my mind. So that was June. I got the subpoena. October, I had this conversation with my attorney, and in April, I was indicted. So April 2014, I was indicted for 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud and 23 counts of bank fraud. So what they did was they took 23 of the transactions of the closings that I had done, and they attached it to the complaint. So, or sorry, 24. So it was a 25 count complaint. And then after I got indicted, I spent about 4 months going through discovery. So most defendants don't do this, right? The attorneys do this. But I was so convinced that I'm going to find the smoking gun. I'm going to prove my innocence. And so I printed out, it was like 200,000 pages of documents and 15,000 emails. And I was like, okay, I'm going to print everything out. I had boxes and boxes. My mom and dad live across the street. So I sort of converted like one of their rooms into a war room, really. And so every day I would take my kids. When it started, I took my kids to school. Then camp started because it was summer, and I would take them to school. They were 9 and 10 or so at the time. And I didn't want them to know. So they just thought I was working on some big case. And then I would like drop them off. I would go to my parents' house, and all day, this is what I did, right? I poured into these documents, and periodically I would take out good pieces of documents and not so good pieces of documents. I also learned a lot about what actually happened. So the developer was doing a whole host of other things that I didn't know that were wrong, right? They were all outside of closing, the way money was transferring hands and who he was sending money to. And so I learned a lot along the way that I didn't know at the time of closings, which I realized all of this is bad, right? And periodically,
is the developer off the hook during this time, or and some of this I don't know what you can say or not say.
no, it's fine. It's all public. So the developer himself never got indicted. The principal guy, the decision maker, money guy, never got indicted.
Interesting.
And it took me a long time to get past that and to just forgive, right? His right hand, his main right hand, got indicted with me. So there was some liability, I guess you could say. Now, by this point, I hired somebody else to be my trial attorney, because my first attorney is very well known in our community. And he basically said, look, you're going to want me as a character witness at some point down the road. So I hired a guy named David Marcus, who's the best in South Florida, or nationally if you ever need anybody. Hopefully you don't. So David, who happens to be also a really dear friend, right? He lives a mile from me still. And so I hired David. And so what I would do is I would periodically go meet with him, and we would talk about the case, or his partner, Margot, and we'd look at the actual evidence, right? So now trial set for December 2014. In August, he calls me up and says, look, can your parents and you come in? We want to have a meeting. We're like, okay. So we walk into the meeting expecting, essentially we thought we were walking in to start trial prep. Like, okay, we're going to talk exhibits, expert witnesses, trial strategy, like all the things you would talk about to prepare for a huge trial like this, right? And instead, he and his partner put on like a whole presentation, and they basically said, okay, Rashmi, this is what you're indicted with. And if you go to trial, this is what the government's going to use to prove their case, okay? And then this is our defense. This is what we'll use to prove our case. And this is how the government's going to rebut, right? And then he goes, look, Rashmi, I've known you for 20 years. I've known you for a really long time. And I know that you didn't go into this planning a crime. I know you. But here's the thing. You knew enough. And you could have asked more questions along the way. And there were moments along the way that you could have asked questions. And look, you're my client. If you want to go to trial, we're going to go. And I will do my best. But I'm telling you right now, you're going to lose. And if you lose, you're looking at like 20 years in prison. Like, it's your kid's whole life. And he goes, look, there's no appeal. Like, the criminal system, it's like 1 in a million chance you would get some reason to appeal. Yeah. And he goes, okay, so let's talk about if you go to trial, what would happen? Outside of all the evidence, a jury is going to get so many jury instructions, but I want to talk to you about 2 of them that are relevant. So the first jury instruction was conspiracy. He goes, okay, let's talk about what the conspiracy jury instruction says. The conspiracy jury instruction says, if the defendant knew even one detail out of 500 million, you, the jury, have to convict her. And he looks at me and he goes, Rashmi, your name is on every settlement statement, every email, every document, every check. Do you really think that a jury is going to think you didn't at least know one detail? And the thing is you did know.
Well, and plus there's this whole, I mean, this is the way society thinks. You're a lawyer.
Correct.
You,
There's
you
like, I
should know.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to get a jury of other lawyers that are going, well, we know that those things happen. No, you're going to get a jury of
there's a high
people that are,
expectation of lawyers to know it all.
there is. And, we could go down the argument of, is that correct or not? That, but the perception is, as a lawyer, as a licensed attorney, you probably should have known. So what you're doing is you're setting the stage for,
and it's, listen,
you didn't have a lot of options.
Well, and listen, at the end of the day, I should have known. I had a fiduciary. So one of the things we talked about was I had a fiduciary duty as a lawyer to ask more questions. So I'll backtrack a little bit because I didn't explain what exactly was happening. So the transactions themselves were that the developer was selling condo units with a buyer incentive. So he was incentivizing buyers to buy his condo units with a financial incentive. So what that meant was the buyers were getting some, sort of financial benefit out of their closing, and that's not right. And because even though the money itself was not flowing from me, like, so my settlement statement was like, I was like, my files are perfect. My ins and outs reflect exactly what the lender approved. In a grander scheme of things, because in the big picture, I knew that the buyer was getting a benefit, I had an obligation to disclose that, and I didn't do that. And that's technically where the fraud came.
Yeah, and my words as a real estate guy, the lender would say that they were being ripped off, and it was not to their benefit. And really, you're representing, who all are you representing in those transactions?
Well, technically, I mean, at least in Florida, you represent both, but the lender,
yes,
the lender's closing attorney.
yes. So that's the quote unquote, the fraud is that there's someone who should have certain credit and be bringing money to the table. I'm trying to maybe explain this for non-real estate people. And then Sally buyer is walking away with the deed to a property, a mortgage on the property, and some cash as an incentive.
And now that cash was going to her 3 weeks later. Okay. Yeah. But it doesn't matter. Had I asked, right? Had I said it, it would have been different. So after this meeting, the second jury instruction, I'll go back to that meeting. The second jury instruction was willful blindness. And this is actually very relevant. And I do a lot of conversation and discussion about this topic with C-suite and executives, because this concept of willful blindness is, in my words, you can't put your head in the sand, meaning not doing something is still doing something wrong. Like, you can't pretend to not know. And that's the thing, is I think that our society has gotten really good at ignoring what other people are doing, or ignoring things that you might not directly think you're part of. And especially in like corporate settings and large organizational settings, I actually say even in our homes, all of this stuff matters. Like, what we do every single day, those decisions matter. And so ultimately he said, look, what he said was, I love you too much to let you go to trial, because he's a dear friend. So that's the hardest decision I've ever had to make, which was I like took off this fighting hat that I had been like latched onto my head for so long, and I put on ownership. And that meant I took full accountability. And I got to a place where I could truly recognize my place in what had happened and my failure in asking questions. And at minimum, I should have at least stopped what was happening, or I could have walked away. And I didn't. And I recognized that. So once I decided to plea, I then called. So if you can't tell, I'm a very anal person. And I mean anal in the sense that, like, I'm very organized. So I decided, okay, I'm going to call everybody in my life and tell them, because I recognized that this was going to help me heal. Most importantly, like I said, I'm involved in my community. So I didn't want people in my community to read about it in the paper. I didn't know if there was going to be a press release. I didn't know
Was it
anything.
was it public yet? Did anyone know? I've had to research, kind of go back on myself. Shame was
Yeah.
a big thing that I had to deal with when we were going through things
Yeah.
also. And it sounds like a variation, or that was big for you also. Did people know about it until then, or do you think they did or didn't?
The only people that knew were the people I had told. So there were a handful of my, obviously my immediate family and close friends knew. What I did was I took that to the 100th degree. So I started calling, like the list included, okay, lawyers, judges, politicians in Miami that I knew that were my mentors and colleagues.
Yes.
It included, so I'm a runner and a cyclist. So it included my running and my cycling community that were my friends, right? That I spent weekends, hours and hours training for marathons and cycling. It included my elementary school friends that I hadn't talked to for 30 years, law school friends, my Wall Street friends. It included my kids' friends' parents and my kids' teachers. So essentially my entire larger community, because the idea was anybody that knew me at my core, I wanted them to know, right? Not, I mean, if it was just somebody who I've seen at a party that, but it had to be people that I cared about. And one by one, I picked up the phone and called them. And I could only do like 5 or 6 calls a day. Cause like I'm telling you the story, I would do this 5 times. And, then I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And I was in tears on every call. And it was incredibly emotionally draining. And eventually I got through the calls and at the end of every call, I would ask for their support. So one of the biggest gifts I've gotten out of this is the recognition that being authentic and owning our mistakes and holding yourself accountable allows people to believe in you. So at least for me, and I would venture to say this probably goes for all of us, is that if you stand up, like you said, in the face of shame, right, and be truly vulnerable, most people who are at that level with you will stand by you. And so the judge got almost 200 letters of support, like a binder this thick. Oh, look, I had it because so he got this binder, right?
Wow.
So normally this is on my nightstand.
Yeah.
It's,
For,
it's all the letters of support that
for
people wrote.
the for those that might be listening to the audio of this, she just held up a massive
To
bound
the binder.
book. So that actually is probably helpful. Do you ever read through that? Do you ever go through that now?
Well, so that's the thing is like I normally keep it on my nightstand and periodically I'll read it. But, it's now been 5 years since I got sentenced. And so these were all written between January and April of 2015. So it's been 5 years. And so I hadn't read it, frankly, in a while. So the other day, actually last week, I brought it from my room. I put it on my desk, and I know we'll talk about this in a bit, but I'm writing my memoir right now. So I got to a place where I was like writing about the sentencing and about these letters, because the letters were used to represent my character and history to the judge for my sentencing. So I start opening and I start reading the letters again. Now, of course, I read all of them in 2015, but now I'm like going back and reading them, and I was like bawling last week, crying, just reading them, just to sort of remembering all the people that wrote for me, and the people shared stories about me from just moments from my life that I don't even remember, but somehow there was something that I did tangible that this person remembered and wrote about, right? It's such a power. It's like being eulogized before you die. It's such a gift. So
But you're still alive, which makes
I'm
it even
still
cooler.
alive. Yeah. So after I wrote these, after I got the letters in June 2015, I was sentenced.
Mhm.
So I had called everybody and invited them to be present for my hearing. And I, again, even though I had gotten all these letters, I mean, it was like the middle of summer. It was a hot Tuesday morning, I remember. And truthfully, school was out. I kind of thought most people were like gone and traveling. And I will tell you that everyone showed up. So the courtroom was packed. The marshals had to ask people to wait outside. There was standing room. It was the most amazing display of unconditional love and support. The judge sentenced me to 1 year and a day in prison. And one of the one of the most amazing moments from my day that day is I had this sort of moment right before he sentenced me, but where I was absolutely the girl who A, thought I had to be perfect to be loved and be valued. But B, I also defined success by the accolades that I got, the schools that I went to, the awards that I won, the grades that I got, the money I made, right? All of these very societal definitions of success and absolutely exist in an immigrant culture, right? And on that day, when I was basically likely to get sentenced to prison, when 200 people stood there in support of me unconditionally, I recognized, how I define success for myself is this,
Mm.
that it's basically on this day where most people would say I failed because I got sentenced to prison. I see that day as a resounding reflection of my success, which is I define myself now by the number of lives of the people I've touched and inspired. And so it kind of really helps me now and fuels what I do, because now I get to share my story. And my thing is like, okay, if I can help one person in today's audience walk away and recognizing like, okay, I'm going to do the right thing, I'm not going to make that first bad decision, then it's worth it to me. It's like the most powerful recognition of how I can define myself and how I want to move forward with my life. And it makes me such a better mom, I will tell you, because look, I still have high expectations for my kids, but hopefully I'm a little tempered. Um, and
So, so one little pause here.
yeah.
How could one arrive at the word dichotomy came to my mind. I don't know if I'm using the word correctly, but the dichotomy of standing before the judgment with 200 plus or 200 supporters probably behind you,
Mhm.
supporting you. That to me is the most dichotomy of the opposite of about to be judged, but massive support behind you. How could we, and I don't know if there's an answer for this, so I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but how could we arrive at that without going through what you did?
So okay, I believe we all have a constellation of stars around us. Okay. And I'm going to tell, and I will credit, um, and I'm not trying to be political, but I will credit Michelle Obama for this term because I read it in her book, Becoming. But when I say that, I believe we all have this sort of circle of people around us now, and then that constellation can get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But you have to, at least for me, I believe I had to allow myself to be real, right, for lack of a better term, but just to not be scared about people judging me, to not care about what people are going to say about me, and recognize that if somebody's not going to stand by me, I don't want them in my life.
Yeah.
The ability to separate yourself from those that are negative and don't feed your soul in some way is a very hard thing to do. But once you can do that, I think it gives you the clarity to recognize all of this good that you have, Um,
But so the thing that I'm always wondering though, as a coach, I work with a lot of people like you do and a lot of, possibly C-levels. I work with a lot of small business owners too, is that I've always studied and wondered how we make significant change or how we come to those times of epiphany like you did at that moment. And I'm making a big deal of that time because it seems significant.
yeah.
And my theory is this, and I'll share it and you could agree or disagree or say maybe, maybe not, is that it is either an intense, focused effort to make that change or adjustment, or you use the word allow the that change to occur. And then my theory is that most people are forced into it. There's a catalytic event. And I think it's significant, Rashmi, right now for the time that we're in, because many people are going through a lot of significant change. They are being forced either financially, health, wellness, aren't able to visit family, whatever. We're probably going to go through a lot of upheaval. And so thoughts on that. Is it something that we could have done on our own? And I'm saying I'm putting myself in the same thing because I went through quite a transformation. Sounds like you went through quite a transformation. Or is it that we have to allow a catalytic event to force us? What do you think?
I actually believe that every single one of us will go through a catalytic event of some type. There's billions of us on this planet and will continue to be. And I think that we're all meant to undergo some of us will go through tragic loss. Some of us will go through bankruptcy. Some others will go through health issues. In my case, I had a significant legal case. And I'm divorced, right? So I have a lot of, I think we all go through something. And sometimes people are not able to learn what I believe is meant for them to learn through those events. I see it like this. When life brings you down to your knees, what are you going to do about it? Because we are all going to be brought down to our knees at some point. And I see it as, okay, you have basically two options. You can either crumble or you climb out of it, right? You find the ability to rise again, to fight out of the despair that you think you're feeling, and recognize that this is an opportunity to do something different, to try something different. So I've had the pleasure and good fortune of getting to know Armando Perez, who's the artist Pitbull. And how I met him is a very interesting story, and the way I got to interact with him is because I was vulnerable and open and sort of walking in shame, as I call it, and shared my story with him. And out of my, sort of this meeting that I had with him separately, and where he just listened to my story like you just did, he invited me to speak at his school. So he has a school that he started for kids, and it's a charter school. And the reason I first was like, the first thing I ever said to him when I got to meet him was, you have inspired me because you stand for this principle that failure is just an opportunity to try again, to start again. And that principle is something that I think, people, fail forward. Like, there's all these things now that people are talking about. And it's, I think either you read about it enough that you believe in it, or you experience it and you have no choice but to live it. And, and for me, I've gotten to that point where in my own life, I have not only myself experienced it, I've watched my parents go through it. Their parents went through it. My aunts and uncles have all gone through it. So I've watched so many people around me, quote, fail or fall on their knees and rise again. And so, I don't know if that's answering your question.
It kind of does. It kind of does, because basically I think we're agreeing that everybody's going to go through stuff. We just have to deal with it. And if you're not going through it now, that doesn't mean you live in fear but we allow for it. That's part of life. Now, I have to say this before it's called growth. It's part of what living is, which is cool. Now, I've got to say this before we move on. As shocking as this may seem to you, I'm a huge Pitbull fan. And so anyway, we may talk off.
He's a really, he's generous. He's an incredibly talented, but more importantly, he's a very spiritual, good person.
Yeah. Cool. Well, all right. Well, we may talk offline about that. Man, he's on my maybe top 5 people I'd love to talk to. But all right, let's do this. I'm watching my time here. And so we've gotten to the sentencing, and I want to say this, that the research, this is how I found you. There was a Washington Post article that I think you had written, and it was submitted. And I was doing research on white collar crime and people that had spent time in prison for a novel that I'm writing, that I'm working on. And you and I had a conversation offline recently about the book you're writing and how fun most of the time writing is and how challenging it can be. But I would love for us maybe just to fast forward a little bit, and because I want to talk about some of the things you're doing with the ethical vigilance and things in the time that we have. But can you just briefly share, because I would venture to say very few people understand what goes on when you walk into a prison and you hear the lock behind you. You mentioned loss of freedom at the beginning of this. can you even encapsulate that in a few sentences? Can you just share just a glimpse of what that
Sure.
might be? And not even that we're trying to glamorize it. It's just,
Yeah.
we don't understand it.
Yeah. Um, so I had to serve time in 3 separate facilities. I'll start with that. One was in Miami downtown, and there's a lot of background, of course, I could always give. So you'll have to read my book for that. But the Miami downtown facility is a 12-story building. Most of the floors are for male inmates. There's only one floor for females. There's no fresh air or sun. You get tiny little slits in the window. That was the one facility where I would get locked in for periods of time, overnight especially, and then for periods of time. There's a little metal toilet in there and a sink with a counter, and then like I guess you could call it a bunk bed, but there's not like a mattress. It's a tiny little bedroll foam, right? So I had like bruises on my hips so I sleep on my side. So I was there for 10 days. And then I was lucky enough to leave there and get transported to Coleman, which is, it's a huge complex of 5 prisons about an hour north of Orlando. And 4 of them are male facilities. The one female facility is a minimum security camp. So it's the only minimum security camp for women in Florida. And so that was a much better facility. I spent essentially 5 months there. Most of my time was there. There was like sort of a makeshift area where you could run. There was a chow hall. There were, so that was I define that as like an ashram experience. So if anyone's familiar or does yoga, might know it's sort of very bare bones, with the addition of course, guards that are on a power trip most of the time, and can be really hard on you. But if you play by the rules and you know what you can and cannot do, so I was there for most of the time. I did go for 23 days. I was taken to a county jail near Tampa, Florida, in Pasco County, because I was asked to testify in a totally different case in Tampa, and there's no federal prison there. So I was held in this county jail, which was absolutely awful, but also very enlightening. And I would say I had an honor to spend 23 days with the women that were there, which
You mentioned that in your, I think you mentioned that in your TED talk. You talk briefly about that. So people need to watch that. We'll include a link so people can go check that out and get the info.
Yeah. So I would say that my day consisted of, I was very steadfast on holding a routine every day. Some people don't do this, right? Other people live in negative energy there. I was like, I'm going to be really focused. So I got up and I sent an email to my kids, and I worked out for 2-3 hours, and then I ate breakfast, and then we all had jobs. So I did my job, which varied over time, but most of the time I was there, I was a teacher. I was asked to teach math. So I taught math and English in the mornings, and then I would have lunch. Then I would teach math and Spanish in the afternoons. And then I would read. I spent a lot of time with 1 or 2 people that I got to be friendly with, and I learned to crochet. So I am like not domestic. So this was a big feat for me. I crocheted a blanket for my kids, each 2 blankets I crocheted for Christmas that year. That was their present from me. So my time, I knew that I wanted to maximize my time and get something out of it. Because again, I was like, okay, the universe is sending me to prison. I'm not going to just waste this time. That's not what I'm about. I'm going to do something with this time. So I read like, I don't know, 100 books. So that was like a blessing that I had the time to do that. And I met some interesting people, and I learned a lot about just myself. I did a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah. Did you always feel, was there fear? Was there at times that your safety,
No.
Is it like on TV or, the movies, where?
Yeah. So look, can it be unsafe for people? Yes, if you choose to get into a fight or if you choose to do bad things. I was advised who to stay away from, so I did. And I kind of kept to myself. I kept my head down. I'm not a quiet person, but I was like generally quiet.
Sure.
And I don't think that safety issue is a really big issue. I mean, I was more fearful usually of the guards, because the guards have a lot of power, and for the smallest thing you can get sent to get in trouble. So that's more where the fear would come in. But no, I was never like, I was just scared of the concept of prison before I surrendered. And on the day I surrendered, which I just wrote about it last week from my book, it was incredibly scary because of the unknown. right? We're all living in that right now. Uncertainty breeds fear, right? Because you have zero control. And I can tell you, I am like the biggest control freak ever. I should say I used to be. And
I'm
I've
shocked. I'm shocked by that. No, I mean, I understand your personality quite a bit. I'm shocked that
shocked.
controlled.
I mean, but I'm like, I have come a long way, right? Because when you go
Well,
through something like that, and
well, control is your superpower, but our superpower can also be our kryptonite. That's really the challenge. What an overused strength can become a weakness.
yes, yes. And so I have tried to not allow it to be my kryptonite. And this experience of not knowing what I was going to wear, not knowing what I was going to eat, not knowing when or where I was going to sleep and what that was going to look like, all of those unknowns, um, obviously has really helped me in this time of COVID because uh, none of it is scary to me in the sense, I mean, obviously the health scare is there, but being isolated or not having access to certain things doesn't scare me because I've lived it at such an extreme level that this is like, okay, we can get through this, right? I have
Yeah.
my family around me. What more do I want? I have
So
family and I have,
let me ask about the family, because that's one question that I was thinking we might could, and I think what we're really going to encourage people to do is, obviously this memoir is going to be going to have a lot of the info that we really are going to be looking for here. But tell us just real briefly, you had children, younger children, you had your family. How did they handle this? And just maybe give us a glimpse of it, and we'll let people get the real info from your book. But just give us a glimpse at, what did your children do while you were in prison?
so the kids were 9 and 10. My son's older; they're a year apart. So it's Kyler and Maya, and they were when I knew for sure I was going to have to leave. Their dad and I, were already separated by this point, but he's a wonderful man. We're like best friends now, So he came over back to the house. He had already moved out, and so the deal was he was going to move back into the house when I left to go away. And so we sat both kids down and we were honest with them and we told them. And I really believe that it was important for me to honor them with the truth. And so we sort of associated it in terms that they could understand. So in this case, it was in terms of sports because they're both athletes. And we told them. And I was lucky enough that I had 60 days to surrender. So I was able to spend those 60 days with the kids, and that gave them time to ask really good questions and sort of just they digested the information and sat with it. And the fear obviously came and went for them. And they would ask questions like, Mommy, can we come see you? Mommy, what are you going to wear? Mommy, what are you going to eat? Are you going to be safe? Like kids want to know their mom's going to be safe, right? At the end of the day, they're going to be able to come back. While I was in prison, they visited me with my parents several times, and because their entire world knew about it, they didn't have to hide from it. So they would tell their teachers, "We're going to visit mom this weekend," and so I would say they were surrounded by love. My parents, like I said, live across the street, so even though I wasn't here, their dad was here. My parents were around all the time. And I would email them every single day and call them every single day. So I had a routine that I had set forth. And you're only allowed a certain number of minutes per month on the phone. So I would keep track of how many minutes I was talking to them, and I was limited on how much I could talk to them. But in general, now they're 14 and 15. They're finishing 8th and 9th grade. They both have separately written about the fact that their mom went to prison for various essays for school. And it's it brings tears to my eyes because it's incredible that they are so proud of me, and the fact that I went through this and now what I'm doing with it and how I'm sharing and helping people through it. And I tell them that, look, my goal, sorry, I'm like getting all teary, but I tell them like my goal is to be the perfect, imperfect mom for you. And, they're teenagers. They're going through a lot of those typical teenage vices and temptations, right, that are out there. And I try to tell them, look, I hope that you'll make good decisions, right from wrong and good from bad, but you might not one day. And that's okay. Try to make the right decision. But if you don't, know that you can come and talk to me or dad, and we will hold you accountable, but we expect you to hold yourself accountable. And look, there's nothing you can do that will make me stop loving you. Like, your mom's gone to prison. Okay. There's nothing you can do. Um, so it's helped me be a better mom, which at the end of the day, it's like I'm so thankful for that. Uh,
Doesn't that sound odd to say though? I'm
it
a
does,
better mom
because I went to prison.
because I went to prison. That I wonder if
It,
that's the
it's
title. Is that the title of your book? Is that the title of your book?
no,
Is that
that's a good idea.
I could
Um,
brainstorm on that. Yeah.
I don't, like I said, I don't wish this on anybody
Right.
else. I'm fortunate enough. I feel like that I have had the strength to come out of it in the way I have, and do something good with it. And I actually believe that's kind of my purpose for having gone through this is I had this strength, and I get so much strength from being vulnerable. It's like
Yeah.
every time I speak on stage, I heal just a bit more.
Yeah.
It's pretty powerful.
That's awesome. There's so many things I would love for us to just continue talking about. I actually, when I was making notes on this, I made fewer notes than I typically make when I'm doing research. And I'm kind of glad I did because I typically would be, oh, I need this bullet point and this bullet point. And so, and what I'm really thinking, and I'm going to encourage, and maybe we could even circle back when your book comes out and maybe do a follow-up, because I'm really going to point people to this book because the discussion we had previously, I think it's going to be powerful for you and others. But I want to ask this question, and then we're going to discuss how you work with clients and what you do, and our world that we're in today. Um, Identity and labels is so important to everyone. And it sounds like you've addressed some things with your children about not being concerned about what other people think about them. But you and I had a discussion previously about just growing up in the culture you were in. And listen, I think everyone has that pressure from their culture. Some it might be more, some might have a little extra gasoline on the fire, but labels that you have had, attorney, successful attorney, graduate of, UNC and Columbia and, and, you know, federal prison, uh, I mean, those are some labels that you could have. What labels and identity do you give yourself now, coming
Now,
through all that you've come through? Yes, now that you've maybe gotten rid of, because I could guess if you and I talked 12, 15 years ago, we would have had a discussion about successful law practice. And you may have even, I don't want to say boasted, but you would have told me about all the transactions you're doing with this one client and all these things going on in real estate. And I would have been in real estate then too, and we would have had a great conversation. But what are the labels you give yourself now,
oh God,
if any?
um, mom, obviously, I would say mother, passionate, enthusiast. Uh, I'm not right, like maybe passionate consultant or passionate leadership consultant, something like that. Fitness enthusiast, adventurer. I like to call myself an empath. Uh, and I don't know, I'm using adjectives, so I don't know if that's actually right.
No, it
But
probably is
probably
because
identifiers. I also see myself as a tenacious fighter. And then I think I used this word earlier, but indomitable. So sort of, I don't know, indomitable woman. I don't know what you would call it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. One thing that's interesting, I actually, as I was doing a bit of research and we've had a conversation before, it's almost as if you're on a mission. And in some spiritual circles, there's the term missionary. I don't think it applies necessarily, but you have gone through something significant and you're on a mission to share that message, and it's with your children, it's with people in corporate, it's with people, and I kind of pick up that it's with anyone that will hear that message. Is that correct?
poor person sitting next to me on an airplane. Ask my kids. So from that extent, there are times where I feel like I'm standing in testimony.
Mm,
Um, because I had a lot of spiritual growth through this, just sort of like the recognition that all is well, I'm going to be okay. So, like I said, I was raised Hindu, but I just identify myself as somebody who just has faith in sort of a higher being and, or a higher, whether you want to call it a being or energy or, spirit. Um, so yeah.
Well, and I think that leads to I'm going to ask some questions about that term that I heard you use over and over again, ethical vigilance, that seems to be part of that message.
Mhm.
And there's a word that you brought up, a term, slippery slope. And can you just talk to us briefly about that?
Yeah.
And then with that, I'm probably going to follow up with, what are you doing for clients now, or what have you done maybe prior to all that's going on with COVID? And maybe it might even look different, but be similar. So
Sure.
slippery slope and ethical vigilance, help us understand what you mean by those terms.
So the slippery slope, I didn't invent the term. It's obviously been around for a long time, but it's this idea that you kind of take this one little step into the gray area. So what I like to say is there's this ethical line of right and wrong. We're all raised with it. We all know what's right from wrong. But at some point, um, you're faced with decisions that fall somewhere in the gray, right? And I always say, look, it's kind of fun to play in the gray, usually. The problem is when you're playing in the gray is where bad decisions get made. And again, this is in our personal lives and our professional lives, right? But when you're in the gray and you start making these decisions, it's very easy to make that first one bad decision that you don't you kind of know doesn't feel right, or in your gut doesn't feel right, but you can rationalize it, you can make assumptions about it, you can justify it with all sorts of external factors, that allow you to do and make this decision. Okay, and then it seems like everything is fine, so you don't do anything about it, and maybe then you make a second decision, and then what happens is pretty soon you've gone from being at this place where you're making good decisions all the time, and you start making one bad decision, and then you start going down the slope. And then, it's very hard to go back up the slope once you've come down it. It's just very hard to climb back up. So what I say is you can anchor yourself against, basically against the slippery slope, and that's with ethical vigilance. And really, it's not rocket science. I did kind of come up with this term, ethical vigilance, but it's essentially 5 steps: pause, listen to your inner voice, reflect, which means like kind of look at what you're doing, to an ethical reality check, uh, make the best conscious decision that you can, that you sense is right. And then the kicker is no matter the consequences, because
Mm.
likely by making the right decision, at some point you will lose something, right? You might lose a job or a promotion, money, a client, a relationship, a friendship. In my case, I didn't want to lose my client, and look what happened, right? So when you can stop and apply these 5 principles of ethical vigilance, it allows you to sort of refocus. And what I say is, in life, we have all these moments where if we just stop for a second, we might be able to sort of just shift a little bit. And maybe we still achieve what we want to achieve with a little shift. And what
Yeah,
you
that's
asked what
good.
I'm doing. So I would say now I spend most of my time being either a keynote speaker at a conference or like leadership retreat for a corporation or an annual event. And then usually tag on to either some panel discussions that I either help organize or I get asked to speak on, and or smaller and more intimate workshops. So we do hands-on workshops, all focused around ethical decision-making and leadership. I do a fair amount on overcoming adversity and sort of what are the skills that we need to be indomitable, basically to kind of have the ability to rise out of these experiences when life throws us a curveball, essentially. And I'm starting to work a lot now with actually colleges and universities. So colleges and universities as a whole, after the whole scandal that happened last year, and I've been working now specifically in the sports area, with sports coaches, with NCAA compliance issues, and again, this decision-making component, and how do you not only get your leadership and coaches and players to do the right thing, but sort of the larger community as a whole, the boosters and all of that. So I'm having fun because I'm a big sports fan, so I like doing that. And I guess you're going to ask me what I'm doing now. So I'm writing my book.
Yeah, I
Uh,
was asking what you're doing now, and I guess one quick question that I want to ask before we kind of start wrapping up that is, does your experience that you've had going to prison, etc., does it close any doors for people to work with you, or does it open doors, or is it a net zero?
I would say it's opened more doors than closed. There are people that, uh, actually, it's interesting. I wouldn't know which doors have closed out of it because those people have never reached out to me or called me. But I have had the great fortune, and I'm humbled to say that over the 4 years that I've been at home, um, I'm lucky enough that people have faith in me and believe in me and have are inspired by me and are open to hearing my story and letting me help them. So that's been really awesome, and really, I feel so blessed that that people want to hear what I have to say and believe that I can help make a difference, in whatever area that I'm coming into their space to do so. Uh,
Yeah.
and this quarantine period has been really interesting because I've allowed myself to begin to focus on a book that I had not found the time to do so because I'm usually on the road. So the kids go to remote school and I sit at my desk and I try to write. So I just sent to this woman who's sort of being my editor, sort of my local editor before I try. I have a couple of agents. I'm looking for book agents if anyone's out there and wants to contact me. But I don't know. I'm like a third of the way through, I would say.
Yeah. How's the writing process for you? I found it invigorating and challenging at the same time.
Same. It's there's some days where I can't. I feel overwhelmed with chaos in my head. And then other days I'm in the flow and it just spews out. I can spew out 30 pages, no problem. So it's a give and
Well,
take.
excellent. So that kind of answers what's next for you. So you really probably don't have a release date or finish date, or you
I don't,
any
because once I finish my script, I'm going to put together a book proposal, try to get it out to some agents. So if I had to guess, it'll be at least 2021, 22 before it would come out. And then hopefully when all this has passed and we can start traveling again, then I'll be uh, available and booking speaking engagements and consulting.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed connecting with you, and I believe that people that are listening will want to connect with you also. Tell us how people can connect with you or reach out to you or follow you or whatever might make sense. We'll include as much as we can in the notes also of the
Okay.
show, but just verbally do that. And then I've got one more question we'll wrap up with.
Sure. So you can reach me on my website. There's tons of information and links on my website, which is www.rashmiairan.com. And that's spelled RASHM like Mary AIRAN.com. All the, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram are all the same. My name, Rashmi Airan. And if you wanted to email me personally, it's pretty easy. It's rushme@rushmeairan.com. And on my website, there is an info phone number there as well. And if you wanted to book me, there is a place to do that as well, to send me an inquiry.
Excellent. Well, I encourage people to do that, and I'm looking forward to the book. Please keep me and the people in my office updated, because we'll definitely do whatever we can to help with that message. And I just appreciate you sharing what you've shared. Rashmi, the title of the podcast is Seek, Go, Create, and 3 words we kind of put together there. Which word jumps out at you and why, as we do our final question here?
Seek.
And why?
Yeah, I think seek because I feel like I am constantly out searching and trying to grow and make myself a better person, and learn, and and hopefully help others seek out the same. So that definitely, I would say, aligns with how I feel and believe and what I aspire to do every day.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And I would agree with you on that from what I'm seeing you do. And I could tell you have a passion for that. Just thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. If you would like to connect and continue the conversation, we encourage and welcome you to do that. Go to seekgocreate.com. That's seekgocreate.com to comment on the episode post, or you can contact and reach out to us there. You can also find us and communicate on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those, we are Seek Go Create. So find us there and put comments, questions, thoughts. I'll even reach back out to Rashmi if there's specific questions you have of her, if you don't go through her channels. Thank you for joining us today. This has been, my goal is always to talk to cool people with the microphone and the recorder going, and that's what we've done today. We look forward to connecting with you on the Seek Go Create podcast in the near future. Thank you for joining us.